Okay, this is the second part of the lecture for Chapter 17. Last time we were looking and seeing that we had equal parts of acid and its conjugate base. And we had the initial pH, which was 4.74, and we're adding in some base. And we want to see what kind of change it's going to have on our buffer, on the pH of the buffer. So we're looking at this setup here, and we have, if we want to make sure they're equal, going back to here, we said that we have equal parts acid and base. So those two cancel out. So at that point, my pH and pKa are equal to each other. So I just take the negative log of this value, and that's where this value comes in. So now we want to take a look and say, what happens if I vary those amounts, and how do the values change? So we set up a little bit of a rice table, maybe not exactly. Obviously, we don't have the ICE over here. We have before the reaction and after the reaction. So once you've seen a couple of these, you kind of get the idea that if I'm adding in a strong base, that's going to go to completion. So however much I add in moles, that's what's going to be taken away from my acid, and that's the exact amount that's going to be added to my conjugate base. And whatever the base was is just going to go away because that's going to go to completion. So here is the reaction. Notice it's not in equilibrium, so it's going in one direction. And again, this was our reaction. So we've done it before. We've actually called it a rice table. Here we're seeing it set up as just a reaction, before and after. Whatever you're more comfortable with is great. So these are our new values. Remember before it was 0.3 and 0.3. So these two values were initially equal to each other, but now I've changed this. This is no longer just 1. Log of 1 is 0. So I have a new value here. If I go ahead and take the log of that, we get 0.06. Add that in to our 4.74 original. And this makes sense because if I add a base to the buffer, the pH should go up a little bit. And it does. Titration, we've done these several times now, so hopefully we were a little bit comfortable with the idea of it. Adding an acid or a base to a solution and making some changes on that, and we can indicate those new pHs, usually with some type of an indicator, or as they're showing here, a pH meter. Looking at this, typically we see that, or we have done it, indicated the changes in pH by looking at the color. And here we have 4 different indicators showing color changes. And these are specific based upon whatever pH I'm looking for. One other thing just to kind of point out here is notice we have sodium and then calcium is a 2 plus in comparison. Zinc further down the line, and then aluminum with a 3 plus. Notice the changes in the pH every time. The pH is decreasing, but the other thing that they're pointing out here is they're changing the indicator. These were pretty close, 7.0, 6.9. Changing the indicator along the way, so because they're good at different ranges. Okay. The main thing we'll take a look at here is just the curve. This is a strong acid being titrated by a strong base, and it's very sharp. Notice between 10 and roughly 49, there's very little change in the pH. It's real flat because it completely neutralizes, and whatever you're left with is what you kind of started with, which in this case is a strong acid. And eventually, they're equal parts, acid and base, and you are equal. Equivalence point. And then it shoots up and all the acid's gone, and now all I have up here is my base. So that's what I see up here. Same scenario here, just repeating what we just went over. And again. And again. If you want to slow these down and take a look at some of the pictures, help yourself. Okay, slightly different scenario here is we have a weak acid with a strong base. Notice initially first is that the pH is a little bit higher, but the other thing to point out is that the pH, the slope increases much more rapidly than it did for the strong acid. And that is because you're producing, in the process, you're creating a conjugate base, so that's further raising up the pH along the way. And then this area here of a transition is smaller than it was on the previous slides because, of course, we are squeezing that in by increasing up a little higher. But up here, it is still fairly sharp, and that is because the acid's gone, and all I have up here is my conjugate base and strong base. So it's a little sharper of a curve than what we see on the down slide over here. This is going through some of the stoichiometry as far as canceling out the weak acid and making the conjugate base and what's left over. You can look at this at your own time. And this also expresses just the relationship for Ka and changes in pH. Notice as the Ka value decreases, the pH at the equivalence point is increasing in there. And of course, the slopes are getting higher along the way as well. These graphs are showing that, yeah, we can titrate from the other side as well. We can say, okay, we're going to titrate a strong, or in this case, actually, excuse me, a weak base with a strong acid. But the important thing that this slide is pointing out is you have to make sure that you're picking an indicator that is within range of your equivalence point. So in this slide over here on the left, we have picked an indicator that is not necessarily appropriate for the color change because the color happens before I'm actually at the equivalence point. I want to make sure I'm picking an indicator that's going to change color in the range of the equivalence point. So typically on this dotted line, we're looking for something to kind of fall in that area. Okay. This is one we really haven't mentioned at all, really. I think a long time ago we did, but in lecture we haven't. The idea of a polyprotic acid, an acid that has more than one hydrogens to lose. So the example we're looking at here is H3PO4. It's got 3 hydrogens to lose. So in titrating it, we notice, find my cursor, we notice right here we have an equivalence, a transition. So one of the hydrogens has been lost, as we can see in the picture there. And then we have a second one shown here where a second hydrogen is lost. And that's as far as this graphic actually took us. We could lose a third one on there as well if we extended out the graph a little bit on the side. But in any case, it shows how many, when you have more than one of these transitions or equivalence points, that's showing each time a hydrogen has been removed. All right, next topic on here, I believe it's the last one, is the solubility products. We talked about this in class on Tuesday. The idea of a solid dissipating into its ions in solution. And just like before, we can make a K expression with products over reactants. Notice we're not actually putting a solid underneath it because its value is 1. It's a solid, 100% pure. And we have our KSP expression, solubility product constant. What is this going? This is just kind of explaining the difference between solubility and solubility product constant. They're making the point here that solubility is not the same thing as KSP. Solubility, as you can see in the definition, typically it's expressed either in 100 mils or per liter, where KSP is more of an expression to take a look at if I'm mixing solutions, will I get a precipitate? That's really what we get from KSP. Solubility is different, as the definition shows. Okay, so common ion effect is the idea that, okay, I would expect this solution to be able to precipitate or have a certain amount of ions in solution. at a certain temperature. What happens if I throw in a little extra barium or sulfate? Let's find out. Apparently, we're not finding out right now. So looking at some of the factors that affect solubility, pH, we did an example of that on Tuesday as well. It can either increase or decrease the ability of a substance to dissociate depending on what that original substance was made from. Something else which is out there is you may have a metal, which was kind of showed in the other slide, that if it mixes up with a certain ion, can further create a more complex ion, which is soluble. And we have several examples listed over here. And one more K expression, which we really won't spend any time on in class. I don't see really a need for that. And again, just looking at some of the different factors, this doesn't really go too far necessarily. It further explains that you can have some ions that further mix with other ion solution, forming others. But you may have an insoluble precipitate that's when mixed with further ions that we can dissolve those further into solution. Okay. And again, we haven't really talked about this in class. You may have one insoluble substance, aluminum hydroxide, and it can be amphoteric. It can react in either direction. If I further react it with more hydroxide, it'll actually dissolve. And if I mix it with some acid, that'll neutralize the OHs and it'll dissolve again. So this aluminum hydroxide, OH3, is kind of an intermediate in the process of going from one direction to the other. Last point on here is the idea of Q. And what Q will do for us is that is us running an experiment. So we just are given some values. Usually it's a volume times a concentration, and we just generate an answer. What we do with that answer is, this is where we get the KSP, the comparison on that. We compare our value to KSP, and if it's equal, that's great. System's at equilibrium, everything's saturated. If the value is less than KSP, that just simply tells me it's unsaturated. I could put more solution or more of either of those ions into that solution and not create a precipitate. If the value is Q, if I'm running this experiment, I actually already know that I've exceeded it because I'm seeing a precipitate forming in the solution. There you go. That's the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions, hopefully you can ask those on Wednesday. Good luck.